Hello there, how is everyone? We are all good, but we are not in the same place. Shall we explain where we are? This is Beth, I'm in London. Ruth?
So I am at home in North Berwick, which today has been voted by the Sunday Times the best place to live in the whole United Kingdom.
And I am in a hotel room in New York City. I'm about 1 block from Bloomingdale's, and I am here because I've been at the UN all week at the Commission for the Status of Women.
This is Electoral Dysfunction, where this week we will discuss the Tory donor Frank Hester, what he said about Diane Abbott, and what it tells us about how parties continue to grapple with the rows about race. Also, Lee Anderson and the Reform Party. He was a Labour councillor, then a Tory MP, and this week he turned to Reform. What does his defection tell us? Is it the start of anything or nothing at all? And we'd also like some more of your messages. You can WhatsApp voice note us on 07934 200 444, and you can email us on electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. So I hope you do. We've had some good voice notes, actually. We're going to get to some in a bit. But look, let's start off with the big electoral dysfunction this week. We're all saying it's Frank Hester. He donated 10 million quid to the Tories back in 2019 and apparently said that looking at Diane Abbott, the first black female MP in the House of Commons, made you, quote, want to hate all black women, and said she should be shot. Something he's not denied, but's tried to explain and offer an apology for, and it has created quite the storm and massive problems for the Conservative Party and leadership. So, Ruth, let's kick off with you. What do you make of the government's handling of this whole debacle?
Well, I think that's exactly what it is. It is a debacle, isn't it? I mean, it's almost as if the Tory party, in its death throes, as you come into an election, hasn't learned the lessons of the past. And it's this whole, taking the lectern out into Downing Street and having a conversation about how we should be talking about and to each other, how we need to stop the language of hate and all this other thing. To say that it's not racist, or to put party spokespeople up who didn't want to say that it was racist, first of all, was just nonsense, because you were always going to have to get to that point where if you say that one person, because of a particular characteristic, is then symptomatic of all people that have that same characteristic, that's kind of exactly what it is, whether that's racism, whether that's taking on somebody's religion, whether that is, in any kind of characteristic, whether it's sexuality or disability or whatever. Like, when you start doing that, then of course it's an ism. That's kind of what isms are. So the idea that people were sent out to try and say that it wasn't what the dogs in the street could see that it was, frankly, is nonsense. And then you've got to go and then do the corrective, which makes it even worse. So in terms of the media handling of this, awful. I mean, I think the one thing that I would say that probably made it quite difficult for Number 10 to come out immediately was, as far as I'm aware, the story was in The Guardian. It was somebody that was in the room 5 years ago when this was purported to be said. Your man Hester didn't say that he'd said that, did say he'd been rude about her. Nobody has a recording. Nobody really has anything. So I can see from Number 10's point of view, they wanted to make sure that they knew what exactly it was and didn't want to have to roll back. But in terms of the handling, I mean, just god-awful from start to finish.
The story came out on Monday. This went on for near 24 hours. It was only actually after Kemi Badenoch, who is a black woman in cabinet, put a tweet out saying that this is racist, but it was only after she said that the Prime Minister then said a couple of hours, making a statement that it was indeed racist.
Exactly. And you've got people like Andy Street, who's the West Midlands mayor for the Conservatives, coming out being very strong, and who is, I believe, very good in all of this sort of space. And I've always found him a really good ally when it comes to this sort of thing. It does feel like the Prime Minister is not leading but is following, that he's being bounced into things by other members of his party. And that's a really hard place to go. And one of the things, and I've talked about this before, is it's really important that you own your own adjectives. So what people say about you. And actually, when you've got people like Keir Starmer saying about the Prime Minister that he's too weak to take on his own party, And then you get example after example where it's only after someone with profile within the party has said something that the Prime Minister follows rather than leads. That then it means he's sacrificing that ground. And it means that that's exactly what people will associate him with. There was a way in which this could have been avoided to a certain degree, which is very early on when he first became leader, when everybody was kind of shocked at how badly the Truss administration had fallen apart, the mini budget had fallen apart, the kind of levels of outrage and ridicule that was happening across the country. He was brought in to steady the ship. If he'd just had a couple of big fights that he'd won early on in the first couple of weeks, slapped people down, then they wouldn't be doing this.
The PM is, I would say, embattled, and you talk about adjectives, Ruth, that leaders don't want to have, and embattled is certainly one of them, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you're one away from beleaguered, and once you're at beleaguered, you're fucked.
Okay. Beleaguered.
Yeah, embattled is good. Beleaguered, that's when you're done.
Jess, I mean, you're many, many miles away, but the whole Diane Abbott situation, she stood up in the Commons 46 times yesterday at Prime Minister's questions, trying to get the Speaker to call her. It's like a story. Everyone's talking about Diane, and she didn't have this moment to talk about how she felt. What do you make of it all?
I mean, that seems like a PR disaster for a embattled speaker, if we're talking about people who are embattled. And just to sort of pull back the curtain a little bit, the way that PMQs works is you enter into a ballot. The sort of top 10 people will get to ask a question that are picked out. And the trouble comes in this situation when the people who are picked out, because it is totally random, are mainly Labour. So it was... because it has to go from one side of the room to the other. It has to go Labour, Tory, Labour, Tory, Labour, Tory, or SNP. So basically, Tory opposition, Tory opposition. And it was very, very opposition heavy. And so the bobbing opportunities, which is what we call it, are less so. That all said, that is the reality of why people don't get called. That all said, there is absolutely no way there wasn't a way around that, either from one of the Labour members forgoing their position. And bear in mind, I've been elected nearly 10 years and I've been picked to ask a PMQ 3 times. So it's I suppose it would be quite hard to ask people to give up that moment. However, I just think that there was a way around this in these situations. And usually there is. So if, like, Grenfell Tower had happened at the weekend, whether the person who was the Member of Parliament for Grenfell Tower was on the order paper or not, they would get called, because everybody recognises it. It seems so distasteful to just have a load of men discussing Diane Abbott and her not being able to say her piece. That does just seem terrible, a PR disaster.
I didn't cover PMQs yesterday, but I saw it afterwards, and I actually messaged Diane because I thought, well, maybe she'll want to come and do an interview on the television or do something where she does speak. But she did text me back. This is what she said. She said, I was actually genuinely surprised the Speaker didn't call me. In all the time I've been an MP, if you led the news bulletins all morning and been mentioned 5 times in PMQs, you would have been called regardless of the order paper.
I absolutely agree. I think that just trying to sort of, as we do, pull back the curtain on how these things actually work. I think because people in my constituency will say to me, can you ask about this at PMQs, as if everybody gets a chance. But in this instance, there's just absolutely no way that she shouldn't have been called. One of the protocols of Parliament is if you mention another member of Parliament, you have to inform them. So, when I've slagged off like somebody for being a bit of a sex pest, I've had to let them know before I do it in Parliament. The very idea that she will have had all these people getting in touch with her saying, I'm going to mention you, I'm going to mention you. It's just a slap in the face then, isn't it, not to be able to speak? Jacob Rees-Mogg once sent me a note because he mentioned me without telling me. I mean, it's not like you're going to get kicked out if you don't do it. But Diane, there's absolutely no way she wouldn't have had loads of communication about herself, and then not being able to speak just seems bizarre.
This is about lifting the lid on the sort of weirdness of Parliament. It makes no sense to the public, but this is what a spokesperson, exactly what you said, for the Speaker said, during PMQs, the Speaker must select MPs from either side of the House on an alternating basis for fairness. So obviously, I also wonder whether, because of everything else that happened...
I think that's a protocol you can get over.
The thing is, he's in a weak position at the moment, isn't he?
I get that because of the difficulty the Speaker's in, he's wanting to absolutely stick to protocol completely right now because it was a move away from protocol that got him into trouble. But I wonder too if part of this is the fact, because Diane Abbott is no longer a member of the Labour Party, do you have weightings in the same way that we have in the Lords? So she's actually an independent member because she hasn't got the Labour whip. It's, of course, 15 years ago when she was there, she wouldn't have that problem because she was part of either the party of government or the main opposition party. And there is a difference that comes with status of no longer being part of parties. And it makes it much harder for either independent members or members from smaller parties to play that full part in Parliament. And there is a question about whether she should still be suspended from the Labour Party.
When you have the whip removed, it basically means that you've done something that the party leadership take issue with. Then they remove the whip, so you don't sit in the House as a Labour MP or a Conservative MP. It's the Conservative side. And at the moment, that's what's happened to Diane Abbott. And she's had the whip removed, I think it's for nearly a year.
She was writing a piece actually about racism and talking about whether it's the same or different for people who are Jewish, for travelling communities, for people who have other characteristics. And she was trying to write about the difference between racism and about discrimination. And she was kind of talking about hierarchy of concern. And I think it was pretty clumsy. And she came out immediately and said, look, I put in a draft that was an early draft. It wasn't the right draft. And I'm really sorry. She made a full apology afterwards.
Yeah, she basically wrote this article, she said was draft, saying Irish, Jewish and traveller people were not subject to racism all their lives, implying there was a hierarchy of racism. She then withdrew the remarks, apologised for any anguish caused, but she still hasn't had the whip restored. Look, Jess, what do you feel about this? Do you think Diane should have the whip restored now?
Look, I mean, like Ruth says, if there was an investigation into the account of what happened, I have absolutely no idea why it would take a year. And this is in no way unique to this particular case. So often political parties, and the Labour Party is just as guilty of this, it seems to take such a ridiculously long time to investigate things. And justice delayed is justice denied on all sides. You would want to see the first black woman elected to Parliament, whether, you like her politics or not. You would want to see this not to be the end of the career. You'd want to see it be celebrated in the same way that like Harriet Harman is going to get as she steps down, having been in Parliament. These women are trailblazers, and for it to end in this sort of sticky horror where everybody's fighting just seems a real shame. So I would much prefer to see Diane Abbott have the whip restored. But I haven't seen the investigation, so who knows?
She is the longest serving black MP. She has suffered horrific racism all her career, worse than anyone else, and it's still, and it's like still going, and it's it's deflating.
I think Jess is being a bit kind there when she's talking about parties that spend a long time investigating stuff. They spend a long time investigating stuff and having people suspended because it's convenient. It's convenient to the leadership. It is convenient to Keir Starmer to not have Diane Abbott having the Labour whip right now because he's done a really good job of driving a coach and horses through Jeremy Corbyn's inner circle, and that includes Diane Abbott. It's just easier to not have her having the whip as you approach an election so that she's not standing for the Labour Party again. And actually, she deserves better than that. She deserves an answer, either yay or nay.
And Jess, Diane's a fellow backbencher. Mm-hmm. You've had a bit of beef with each other in the past. I think that's fair to say. Mm-hmm. But have you spoken to her about any of this?
No, I mean, I very much doubt that Diane Abbott would be coming to me for comfort. But regardless of the fact that we don't get on very well, you are just there as humans working in the same building. And so you try and be kind to each other about that sort of thing. It's fundamentally awful what has happened to her. Regardless of whether you've done anything wrong, it's so horrible to be the story. It's really, really even like I say, if it's a story about you being like having death threats or something, and there's no case for you to answer, it is like it stops you sleeping. Like you're constantly checking on things. You're constantly on your phone. The therapy in that for a lot of people is for them to speak. And so that coupled with what happened at PMQs, it just seems It just seems really like she must be going through a terrible situation. And I think one of the statements that she did make was that she was scared. Like, that is a horrible thing to hear, that she's scared for the threats. And, you don't want a woman who served so long and you imagine being totally toughened up by the political system. That's the sort of paradox of it, isn't it? Is that after all these years, you think, you get the sort of hide of a rhino, and you do. But, to still just feel scared is just horrifying.
I think part of this, Jess, as well, she says that she's scared after what was said. To explain to people, in that situation, you're not thinking that this guy that runs a tech firm or a software firm is going to come and shoot you. That's not what you're thinking. But what you're scared of is the fact that when that language goes out there, that you have outriders, you have people, and when they're not slapped down and when there's not that political leadership that says, that is completely unacceptable, that's beyond the pale, we're cutting you off, we want nothing more to do with you, that other people get emboldened. And you feel, when you are in the eye of the storm, when you are a story, you feel hunted. It feels like there is a mob after you. You do feel more vulnerable when you're outside. It's really hard to convey to people the levels of unsafe that you can feel.
And Jess, I'm going to ask you, because you might not have seen it, but last night she tweeted out, it was when you were on the Peston show and a comedian, I think, was doing an impression of her.
I know the clip. It does the rounds relatively regularly. I don't know what Diana's said. What she said? Well,
she said, hang on, you won't have seen it because I'm just realising you would have been asleep. She's retweeted it and said, journalist Peston and Labour MP Jess Phillips having a good laugh at someone impersonating Diane Abbott. Racism is not the preserve of any one political party.
She's entirely entitled to feel whatever she feels, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with her about that. But I don't know that it's particularly comparable with saying that you want to kill a black woman and other black women because of what a black woman has said and done.
And also our whole conversation, actually, where everyone has agreed, is it's absolutely unacceptable. Everyone in this conversation has agreed that it's just absolutely abhorrent that was said of her and about her.
I think that there is definitely an issue within all political parties about hierarchies, though. That is the reality. And I would say that actually the Conservative Party in this instance, and in no small part thanks to Kemi Badenoch, and I feel a little bit bad that it is always the people of the ethnicity that is being attacked who have to be the outriders, but that they were more robust about this particular, although not robust enough to give the money back, but more robust about this than they were about the Islamophobia thing. They still haven't said that was racist. And within the Labour Party's, and totally understandably, I can totally cut them slack for this, the sort of level of upset and concern about anti-Semitism comes from a sort of hypersensitivity about how bad it got. You do have to keep your house in order with regard to everything. And I would say all political parties are a bit sexist and have quite sexist processes and protocols that don't get dealt with.
But that's part of the overcorrection, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it was so open in Labour, particularly on anti-Semitism. That's one of the reasons I would suggest is why Diane Abbott is currently not sitting as a Labour member in Parliament. It's because her article talked again about hierarchies of concern and hierarchies of prejudice and suggested, the way I read the piece, that actually travelling communities, Jewish communities, it's not the same as for black people who have the sort of visibility of difference.
It seems to me that now, given what's happened and given this awful incident for her, it would seem quite heartless, wouldn't it, for the Labour leadership to not restore the whip to Diane Abbott?
I think Ruth makes a good point about the sort of level of convenience. When you're crashing towards an election, and this is the case on all sides, that a sort of feet dragging, it concludes itself because of electoral terms. And that seems like a sort of punishment of the system, that the system would never meter out, but can conveniently be meted out because of electoral cycles.
Yeah, just as a brief postscript, Beth, the discussion about whether the £10 million, £10 million is a lot of money, whether it should be given back or not. It's kind of instructive that you've got government ministers going out saying, well, actually, we'd probably accept more from him, at the same time as you've got senior people within the party saying, actually, we should look at whether we give this back. Like there still isn't a line from that. We're days into this.
I think they're not minded to give it back, and there's an idea that it was...
I don't think they have
well,
it.
Also, yeah, that it's already been spent. A former cabinet minister said to me the other day that they absolutely thought the money should be given back.
Even if they just said, this was said 5 years ago, we didn't know when we took the money, it's been spent in good faith, we're not going to give it back, but we're not going to take more from him. At least have a line.
Frank Hester accepts that he was rude about Diane Abbott in private meetings several years ago, but his criticism had nothing to do with her gender nor colour of skin. The Guardian's right when it quotes Frank saying he abhors racism, not least because he experienced it as a child of Irish immigrants in the 1970s, and he's rung Diane twice to try to apologise for the hurt he caused. You know, we've talked about him a lot. That is his right of reply. Final thought on this as well. All of this awful race row has happened in the week that Michael Gove is redefining extremism, which the government claim will tackle the threat from Islamic and right-wing extremists that has intensified in the wake of the October 7th attacks and the subsequent Israel-Hamas war. How do you think what is going on plays into this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, this was probably on the books to be done, and it was well trailed, and this blowing up has been, from the government's view, you know, very unhelpful to it. But I actually also, I don't think it's a bad thing to update the terminology and all the rest of it. It seems to have been a bit out of date. I don't have any objection to that per se, but I don't actually see to what purpose it is, because that's wholly different from Anti-Terrorism Act. So even if you change the way in which you describe organisations or change which organisations fall into a guidance, which is essentially what this is, you're not giving the police any more powers to arrest people or charge them than existed yesterday. So we're kind of not really addressing the problem.
There is a massive concern about what Michael Gove is saying. Is just like people that, you know, at what level is it extremist? And he may very well identify groups that, you know, we would all in this room and almost any room identify as being extremist. When groups get prescribed, there's often very little pushback from anybody about, you know, actually they're the good guys. That almost never happens. The process by which, like, sort of a minister who, you know, what the hell does he know about half the stuff? Like, why does he just get to say X, Y, Z are affecting our democracy? And for me, one of the biggest and growing levels of extremism in our country is that of your sort of Andrew Tate-esque misogynistic groups that are genuinely grooming young men in our country online. And we've had incidences of incels, you know, shooting people in the street, almost all terrorism that goes on to happen. So if you look at the cases of very severe terror attacks, the huge crossover with those people previously being domestic abuse perpetrators is massive. And so the idea that we're updating it because we think it's a bit tired and that isn't one of the conversations that we're having makes it seem like it's entirely political and nothing to do with the actual outcome.
So that whole rise of like the online incel community and it's sort of come out of the States. So my understanding is that incel means involuntary celibate, as in, correct. Like, I don't know why you'd want to tell people like that you can't get any, but like, crack on, lads, whatever you're doing. But then the Andrew Tate stuff, his wealth, his power play, his cars, his, you know, barn that he lives in Romania or wherever the heck it is, like, allows him to have like a stream of leggy women. There seems to be this deep misogyny. I don't get how these people even speak to each other, never mind form communities online and then go out and inspire each other to do heinous acts in real life.
I think it is just the genus is the hatred and humiliation of women, and it's really frightening. In most levels of extremism, there isn't a great deal of analysis. To be fair, I think it is just the sort of desire to hate women and to assume that any failing that you have isn't because of you and I wouldn't say necessarily it's because of the individual. I would say that there are societal problems that lead people into this, but the idea that you don't have something because a woman has it, like she's taken it from you. It comes from the very root and base issue, and this was definitely true when I was a child and I was able to be convinced of this, that women have sexual power, that women can pick and choose who they have sex with, but men can't. And men are sort of beholden to women for sexual power. And that is a lie that women are told and that men are told as well, that is really, really, really perverse, that it's women's problem, men can't have sex.
And the thing about sexual power, which Jess talked about, makes me think about why pornography is developing in a way in which women are so subjugated. It's almost because it's because
we have to backlash from this idea.
The more economic power women get, the more disempowered they are sexually, right? Anyway, that is a whole different podcast spin-off.
It is. And actually, I'd like to come back to this because, I'm you guys have got children that are a bit older than me. You've both got sons. I've got a son who's only 5. Like, I'm going to have a conversation with him, and when we're older, because it's so easy to view pornography, I'm going to have a conversation with him about what sex is and what it should be.
When I was a kid, you'd have believed that having sex, if you watched films, there was like music that happened and a white curtain was going to like waft over you. Yeah. Whereas for my children, it's that they're going to strangle somebody and spit in their face.
The actual conversation about what trust you need, what, affection that you need, what care that you need, like all of the other stuff that you're supposed to do and to be. I just, oh God, that what they're going to see and what it should be is so far apart. I don't even know how I'm going to start that conversation. I think that might be one for his other mum.
Yeah.
Those conversations have certainly moved on, haven't they, from the birds and the bees one where, where your parents just like, oh, it just happens, like, let's move along. You can't as a parent in the modern day do that now. You have to deal with it head on. There was so much going on this week. Let's go on to the Reform Party, because they're probably having a good week. I think that Richard Tice and Lee Anderson, maybe they're on top. Lee Anderson, he's joining Reform. Can they capitalise on what happened on Monday, Jess? Do you think they're going to struggle with that, or is this a good moment? Is this a good moment for the Reform Party? Come on.
The only way that they can capitalise on it is if others walk the floor and put pressure on Rishi Sunak to call a general election, where I predict, and I'm willing to eat hats, etc., that Reform will not win a single seat in Parliament. They are nowhere near as powerful as UKIP were at the height of their power, which was 2015, the first election I ever stood in. And they definitely were at the height of their power then, because they had an issue. I literally, if you were to currently put me under duress, I wouldn't be able to tell you what Reform's policy was on anything. And so I very much doubt that my constituents would be able to. The model of Reform and UKIP, and that there have been like progressive parties that have tried to have this model as well, isn't to actually gain seats. It is to manipulate the politics to be more into their, and they're very, very good at doing that with the, all power to them, actually. They can make their issue the issue. I think that Lee Anderson will lose his seat roundly, and watching him sat next to George Galloway, to coin a phrase, they looked in PMQs like, two cheeks of the same slapped arse.
So can I give a bit of insight into this in terms of people? I had an MSP who was elected for the Tories when I was leader. And after I left the leadership, went independent and then was enticed to join Reform and became the Scottish leader of Reform. And then she stood in the south of Scotland, where she'd been a council leader for us and had been elected as an MSP into the Scottish Parliament for us. And she stood in the 2021 election and got 0.2% of the regional list vote. 0.2%. And I think the point that you're saying is that if UKIP couldn't get people elected when they had a couple of MPs and all of the airtime and a communicator like Farage, whatever you think of him, like he gets himself on the telly and he says stuff that people find themselves nodding along with if you're of a certain demographic. If Change UK, with multiple MPs, were formed from different parties across the Parliament, couldn't get anyone elected. If Reform hadn't managed it up until now, like I genuinely think that the people who are in number 10 stressing about the fact that Reform have got to double figures in the polls. I don't think that I'm being complacent, but I do not expect them to get anywhere near their polling numbers when it comes to a general election. And we haven't even seen it in by-elections, and that's when you can kick the incumbents.
It's not about whether they're winning seats, it's whether they're splitting the vote that went Tory in 2019 in some of those constituencies in that coalition put together by Boris Johnson that's going to make a lot of MPs nervous. Isn't it about the psychology of it on an already ragged Tory party at war with itself? Isn't that the danger?
Yeah, exactly. But the problem that the Conservative Party election planners have is that they have to take a different argument into the seats where they're fighting the Lib Dems, a different argument into the seats where they're fighting Labour, and a different argument where they basically stood as the Let's Get Brexit Done party, irrespective of your politics. And, you have to know who your voters are, you have to know where they are, and you've got to have messaging that works to them and for them. And at the moment, the Conservative Party doesn't have a coherent message overall for the country, never mind for individual strands within it. They are a mile away from where the election machine needs to be to shore up that coalition.
I was at the press conference on Monday, but the press conference was extraordinary, really, because you had sort of Reform absolutely cock a hoop that they got their first MP in Lee Anderson, and Lee Anderson absolutely refusing to behave at all in any way that Richard Tice would want him to, and Richard Tice looking increasingly uncomfortable on stage as Lee was just so blatantly rude. I mean, I asked him a question and...
he was so rude to you, Beth. He was so rude to you. But the thing is,
I didn't really notice at the time. So I asked him a question about... Basically, the question was something along the lines of, you were Labour, then Tory, now Reform. What do you say to people who say that the problem isn't the political parties, it's you, and actually this is about attention seeking? Fair question. And then also about disloyalty to Rishi Sunak, who'd make him deputy party chair, and to all of these other colleagues that after he was suspended for basically suggesting that Sadiq Khan was in cahoots with Islamists because they were apparently all his mates, and he was suspended from the party. And then people came out to defend it anyway, and then he defected. Anyway, so when I asked him my question, he didn't like it, and he gave me a 3-word answer, which was country, constituency, party, and then he went, next question, Richard. I was like, I'm not having that. And I tried to go back, and we had a bit of a back and forth.
Wasn't there a man behind you telling you to stop talking?
That was the PR guy.
I noticed like a man being like, you've had your say.
Yeah.
And it's like, and you were like, he didn't answer my question.
The thing that is, and you can all go and have a look at this if you are so inclined, because I didn't notice that, but brilliant social media, right? So we clipped up the clip and it looks like he gives me the middle finger. Or people said on social media that Lee gives me the middle finger as I'm asking my question. I'm like, what? And he takes his hand out of his pocket and he rubs his eye like this with his middle finger. Twitter, social media, you can all make up your own minds. The last time someone did really give me the middle finger was my brother, circa 1988 at Sunday lunch, and I was like 12 and he was 15. But if we're going to do it at national press conferences, let's go.
I kind of think that Reform slightly missed a trick with that because they were so excited about having their first MP. They obviously hadn't kind of worked out how they wanted to choreograph it at all. One, they put a flag in front of his face from when he was speaking, so it looked stupid. But two, like, I don't know why people treat Lee Anderson as like some sort of like cheeky chappy. He's not. He gets so angry. Richard Tice is quite an enthusiastic guy. He's quite shiny. He gives it the kind of car salesman kind of sell, all of that. And then he's so excited and he introduces Lee Anderson. And then it's just like grumpy man getting angrier and angrier. And tonally, it was really off as well.
My favourite one, and my friend suggested that we get this printed on a T-shirt, was this great young woman from the Telegraph had a great question. It was actually my favourite question for the press conference. She said, Lee Anderson, in January, you told me that, the Conservative Party had given you a political home and that why would you want to knife them in the back? And here you are knifing them in the back. What's changed? And he basically just went, that's politics, darling. And my friend said that I should get that on a T-shirt. Should we all get one? That's politics, darling.
I have to say, like, if he thinks that jumping ship to reform is going to save the seat, I think he's going to have a pretty rude awakening.
To be honest, Ruth, what I really think was he didn't have an option, because unless he apologised and withdrew the remarks about Sadiq Khan, the Conservative Party were not going to restore the whip, right? So where was he going to go? He could either back down and keep as a Conservative MP, or he didn't. I mean, I think there is an issue, though, as well, about the Conservative Party. You know, you said about him being an angry, not very good, you know, kind of the impression he leaves. The fact is, Ruth, that Rishi Sunak made him a deputy party chair of the Conservative Party. So the reason that Lee Anderson's a big deal is because the Tory party made Lee Anderson a big deal, right?
Yeah, completely. It was because they thought that he spoke to a particular base within the party, a particular segment of the party that they were frightened of. So they thought, what we'll do is we'll have you in the tent pissing out rather than out the tent pissing in. And what that meant was, it meant that when the flood of piss came, to keep the analogy going, like, everybody got flooded away, and it became a deluge. And again, it's this idea, if you take hard decisions early, actually you have an easier time of it down the line. So like, just a bit of political courage at the start. And you know, make him pay his dues, make him be a PPS, tie him into the system or not.
What Rishi Sunak thinks the British public are like is he thinks they are cartoon characters who fit into certain categories. And Lee Anderson has made a pretty penny being a cartoon character, because, like, cartoon characters, the reason people like them is because they're over the top. And so he has made a pretty penny doing that. And Rishi Sunak has assumed, because he does not know people in the North and the Midlands, he thinks that, like, we're all like Andy Capp.
No, I'm going to defend the PM here, because he's not somebody that was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. It's not like he's not had any experiences outside of being mega rich. Yes, he's made a ton of money and he's married even more. And I get that he's got like a nice lifestyle now, but he's not somebody that has never had to work for a living. He's not somebody that's never, you know, met people that are from different backgrounds to him. That's not true. I think where you are hitting the nail on the head, though, is the stuff that isn't his background. When he doesn't understand something, he takes advice and takes it very literally. And if you've got people that's like Lee Anderson saying, this is what my constituents believe, and, you know, this is my background, and it's wholly different to yours, he probably does believe that that's what it's like. And actually, he needs a better litmus test.
Ruth, you talked about how effective UKIP were. What struck me when I did an interview with Tice after the press conference was where he talked about punishment of the Tories, that they needed to be punished for not delivering Brexit as they should, punished for not fulfilling their manifesto pledges on immigration. It's more that they care about punishing the Tories and taking their vote than winning seats. So Lee could get revenge against the Tories. What do you think of that?
It is easier politics to say to people that aren't having a good time right now, who are struggling because there's an economic crisis, because it came off the back of the banking crisis that we never really fully recovered, that there's a poorer standard of living, that they are dissatisfied with their own life and their own choices and the country around them, and there's a feeling of malaise and disdain. It is easier to say to these people, let's blame them for it, and let's kick them, and you can have agency and autonomy, and you can feel better about yourself, rather than having a set of policies which say, this is how we can improve your community. This is how we can improve the opportunities for your children. This is how we can improve things like education, which is a route out of poverty. This is like, it is so much easier to knock down a barn than it is to build one. Like, it is so much easier to do that. And there's an appetite for it. There are people that want to see the Tories kicked because they've been in power for a really long time. We know that this is going to be a change election, and it feels much more like a change election than a continuity one. But it's kind of lazy politics. And also, people fundamentally want their politicians to make things better for them, and reform isn't offering them anything better. And that's why I think reform will get punished at the ballot box.
We're going to stop there on that bit, but coming up, your messages and questions, and a WhatsApp which seems to compare one of us to Kim Kardashian. That's out there, isn't it? I can't wait to get to that. Okay, messages. Let's do some questions. We have an email from David who got in touch via electoral dysfunction at sky.uk. David says, I work with a lot of young people and they find it really hard to engage with politics, especially when so much of it feels like political grandstanding. So David asks, how should politics go about engaging young people? Jess, what do you reckon?
I was with a group of young people yesterday at the UN from all over the world, and they're obviously more politically engaged, but they were basically saying the same thing. It doesn't feel like it's for us. And I have to say, I'm going to put the ball back in the court of young people because although I feel like I'm 19 in my head, I actually am the mother of a 19-year-old. Young people have been so downtrodden, actually, over, the last sort of 15 years that, they get paid less. There is literally a law in our country that if you're under a certain age, the minimum wage is much less for you. The reason that that's allowed to happen in politics is because young people don't vote at the same rate as people who own stuff, basically. And what I would really encourage young people to be doing, of course, we need better education in our school. Political education is dreadful in our country. In France, for example, it's way, way, way better. But young people need to start organising themselves into voter drives to make sure, because as soon as they do that, politics will start to recognise them considerably more. And they will feel much more invested in it because at the moment they are done too. And that's partially because they don't vote. Make politicians scared of you. I'm not scared of a massive youth surge. You notice that the triple lock's been kept for pensioners for the entire time, and that's because they vote.
I remember the whole issue about 16-year-olds and should 16-year-olds get the vote. Is that something that's going to come up at the next election, do we think?
I've had a couple of people ask me about it, younger people, and I've always voted for 16-year-olds to, certainly did were 16-year-olds allowed to vote in the referendum in Scotland? Ruth?
Yeah, so we're allowed to vote in the Scottish Parliament, in local government elections and in referendas that are the control of the Scottish Parliament. We were never allowed to vote at 16 for the European Parliament when we were still in, or for the general election.
Are you for 16-year-olds being able to vote in a general election?
Yeah, I am. And I'll tell
you
why. Is because some of the best and most engaged and best Q&A questions I've ever had have been from people that are in those sort of senior teenage years. And also in terms of the way in which things can apply to you, like tax can apply to you and working can apply to you and all these other things can apply to you, you need to have representation if you're going to be taxed and all the rest of it. But I would slightly throw it back to the person that sent the letter in. I actually disagree. I don't think that young people are disengaged from politics. I think young people are intensely political. I just don't think that they think that political parties are vehicles for them. So the number of kids that are involved in climate crisis, in doing stuff either in a small community level or doing things online in a national and supranational level is enormous. The number of kids that are involved in political charities and charitable organisations that have a specific purpose and end. I think the problem is people like Jess and me haven't been able to show young people well enough that what they want to achieve in the world can be aided, finessed, increased by political parties doing it. And it's the governments that have the levers of power or the powers of convention or convening do to be able to get things to happen faster. And I think it's on both sides because of that.
And from that, we've also heard from 24-year-old Kalim, who really loves politics. Here's a voice note.
I'm 24 years old, so I'm quite young-ish. Still trying to get into politics and just wondering if you guys had any tips. Probably one of the few people that got as excited to receive an Instagram message from Beth Rigby the other day as if I received something from Kim Kardashian. So take that in your stride.
I don't know why you're laughing. Why is that funny?
Because, you're better than Kim Kardashian to me. You're of a higher level to me. Ruth.
Oh, a million times. I actually don't really know what Kim Kardashian's famous for.
No, I don't. But I do know that she's got 350 million Instagram followers. So, Kalim, thanks for that. Hopefully your endorsement can boost mine.
My son got very excited once because Arnold Schwarzenegger started following him on Instagram. I was like, I don't know if it's the real Arnold Schwarzenegger, but okay.
I mean, the only time I've properly fangirled out on social media was when Rebel Wilson replied to a tweet of mine. I mean, it was probably a PR and I didn't care, but I was like, that is Rebel sodding Wilson. Come on.
Mark Hamill once replied to me. I was like, oh my God, my brother's called Luke after Luke Skywalker. I couldn't believe it. Right, the first thing I would say if you want to get involved in politics, right, I mean, either go a political party route, but what I will warn you, Calum, is that, I mean, I can only speak for the Labour Party. I wouldn't want to speak for the Conservative Party, although I imagine it's exactly the same, that if you go to a political party meeting in your local area and you think that that's basically what you're going to have to put up with, it is almost certainly where hope goes to die. It's a lot about minutes of meetings. Don't expect that to be the be-all and end-all of political campaigning. So join up with like a local campaigner. But the most important thing I'd say is find out what you care about, Kaylin, because actually, no matter what loyalty to political party I feel, it's not the thing that gets me out of bed. The fact that I have issues that I want to see changed is when politics is tedious. And if you're watching The West Wing, like nobody ever stuffs envelopes. Expect to stuff more envelopes and walk more streets than you see on political dramas. But nothing would get me out on the streets more than the sort of desire to change a thing. So find the thing that gets you out of bed, and for me, that's always been women's rights. But, you know, there'll be something.
I think if you want to be involved in elected politics, you want to become a politician, you've got to want it for a purpose, like Jess says. There's got to be stuff you want to change in the world to make better. Definitely that. But also, certainly in the Conservative Party, and I'm sure this is true in Labour, do other stuff first. So there are loads of people, they're so political and they're really engaged and it's great to see, but they go and do a politics degree and then they go and try and intern for a party and then they get taken on, working as a bag carrier for a politician or doing admin in their office. And then they start putting themselves forward for selections. And yes, those people have a bit of a head start in terms of knowing how the system works. But actually the folk that choose who their local candidate is tends to be disproportionately slightly older people who have a bit of experience, who want you to have experience too, that want the person that they go to for advice on things that are really troubling them or for help. They want that person to have done stuff. It doesn't really matter whether it's in business or in the local authority or in the public sector or public services, or I was a journalist before I was a politician. They want to see you having lived a life and done a bit first. So do what you enjoy and are passionate about, and get involved and start doing the leafleting.
Now, we've barely got any time left, but before we check weekend plans, Ruth, please tell us the story about Theresa May, the MP who's announced she's standing down, former Prime Minister, and the porn actress Theresa May. I don't even know where to go with that.
So this is amazing. I found this absolutely amazing that when Theresa May stood down, there was loads of stuff on the internet about her. And she's one of these people that is so immensely private. I have so much time for Theresa May and she was very good to me. But I wanted to shake her because, she got into trouble for talking about girl jobs and boy jobs when she was on the One Show and was saying that Phillips takes the bins out and that's a boy job and stuff like that. And I wanted to be like, no. When you became Prime Minister, he reduced his hours at work. He took half days so that he could run the house so that you could be the Prime Minister because being Prime Minister was a girl job. Tell that story. And one story that came to light that even I'd never heard was that when she first got elected, she started, when she got promoted to the front bench, she started getting emails and letters from young gentlemen from a demographic that she wasn't used to, who were big fans of hers because she was on adult entertainment films and programmes, I think films. So ITV, GMTV, brought MP Theresa May onto the sofa at the same time as adult movie star Theresa May onto the sofa and interviewed them both about it. And what's lovely about it is that they were really nice to each other and they were acknowledging that women getting on in their own respective careers. And then when they got off camera, they went off and had a coffee together to further chat about their lives, which is so Theresa May that I know, which would be to be respectful, to be complimentary, to want to have a conversation in private away from prying eyes. That is so her. But also to say yes to sitting on a sofa with a porn star to talk about women getting on in their chosen professions. And I think it's brilliant because she's so reserved and she gives so little of herself in public. We need more of that. And I think more stories about her are going to come forward of when she's shown that human side, because lots of people think she doesn't have it and she really, really does.
Okay, weekends. Jess, you're at the UN this weekend.
Well, I'm actually flying home today, so I'll be in my advice surgery on Saturday morning, but I'm going to a wedding this weekend of a woman who I met because her sister was killed So I've met her through my activism, and she's having a wedding in Birmingham this weekend. So I'm taking my son and his crutches. Just an update on my son, still waiting for the MRI, if the health secretary would like to move that along. I'm at a wedding, a sort of bittersweet celebration.
Bittersweet for sure, that is, because tell us what you've been doing this week.
So I'm at the Commission for the Status of Women, and I have been meeting, mostly with women who are living in conflict zones, women of Gaza, women from Afghanistan. My God, those women are incredible. And what they've been put through and are still being put through is amazing. Women from Ukraine, and looking at how we make sure that women's rights are not forgotten in our sort of global conflict.
Okay. Well, we'd be glad to get you home as well. And then you can keep campaigning for women here too. And Ruth, what are you up to?
Yeah, I feel bad because that's also noble. And I take my hat off particularly to the women of Afghanistan. I was out there in 2018 before the Taliban took it back over. And even then, it was exceptionally hard for particularly women MPs. And I met with a group of them. And honestly, they are so inspiring. We use the word inspiring so much, but they are amazing women and so strong. And face such difficulties that we can't even imagine in this country. For me, this weekend, I'm having a bit of a weekend off. So I am flying to Dublin and I'm taking my Irish wife and her Irish brother and her Irish sister-in-law to the Scotland-Ireland rugby game. And while I live in hope, I'm not overconfident, shall we say, of a result, which is difficult because my brother, Jen's brother, my brother-in-law, can be a bit of a devil when it comes to pulling my leg about not being Irish. So yeah. So I've got. I hope I should be like storing up partner points by having forks out for all these tickets and taking them to the game and sitting there while they wave the flag and get the trophy for the Six Nations, presented to them and all sorts, as they probably will because they're the top of the table. So yeah.
Well, I'm going to do a bit of rugby then on Saturday night watching. And then on Friday, I'm taking my daughter to watch Stranger Things. And this makes me sound like I go to the theatre all the time. Literally, this is I don't. But basically, I'm trying to get her to do stuff with me, and she agreed to do this, but only on the stop laughing, Jess. Only on the basis that I take Ruby, Angelo's cousin, with us because she's in her 20s and apparently much better company than me. So I'm taking Ruby and Edith to the theatre. I know.
You are so cute the way you're trying to assimilate with your children. I just gave up. I can't tell you. Just rip off the Band-Aid. Let them think less of you.
We've got to go. We've run out of time. So thank you for listening. Follow us in your usual podcast place. Leave us a review. Email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. WhatsApp me on my burner on 07934 200 444. We're getting so many questions. We love it. Keep it coming. And we might just do an episode with Q&A over Easter if we get enough questions from you. Apparently we've got loads. So that is fun. Ask us whatever you want. We're back next Friday, and don't forget to start your politics week with Politics at Jack and Sam podcast. It previews the story of the week with my colleague Sam Coates and Politico's Jack Blanchard, and it's a great primer to get your head fully into the political week. So give that a try. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.